Initial access isn't always just breaking in. Sometimes it's just showing up as something organizations already trust. This week, we've got attackers hiding inside developer tools and NPM packages, jumping on live Zoom calls to get remote access, and exploiting edge devices before patches even exist. So the question is, if all of that looks like normal activity, how do you actually catch it? I'm Sean McMillan, community manager here at Bishop Fox, and joining me today are Derek Rush, managing senior consultant 2, and Richard Brown, senior managing operator 2, both with Bishop Fox. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, happy
Thanks
to
for
be here
having
and
us.
offer.
I guess let's start with this report from Tech Radar. Info stealers are being disguised as Claude Code, OpenClaw, and other AI developer tools. Kaspersky reports attackers are impersonating these tools, leading users to fake sites that deliver info stealers when they copy install commands into their terminal. That can expose source code, credentials, corporate data directly from a developer's machine. So, how much visibility do teams actually have into what the developers are installing locally?
Yeah, I guess I would start by saying malvertising campaigns aren't really anything new, perhaps in the context of generative AI solutions and picking on software that developers are likely to go out and seek today is, somewhat taking advantage of a social hype cycle. So this one can really just lead to like software restriction policies on an endpoint to control what's being installed or perhaps monitoring directories for software that does get installed there. But yeah, targeting users through advertisements like that, knowing that if there is a piece of software out there that they're looking for, it can be a great way to kind of use that foundation of rapport and again, social hype trends to target users.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when we have people who are developers who are coming up, trying to experience the AI boom and trying to grab the first link that comes out. There's always that joke about how the dark web is just a second Google page, because no one ever goes there. So I think digging deeper into it helps out too. But really, it's tough to know what a developer has on their machine if you're not locking it down with like an app locker or some kind of other software restricting them.
Yeah, and speaking of locking down, like, does this? We've kind of talked in the past about tools like this becoming part of the overall attack surface. That's kind of where we are now. Do you see organizations treating it that way, or is there some resistance there?
My experience is there is it's still largely the Wild West there. The amount of organizations that I've run across that allow for some level of software restriction policies. If we, let's say, try to install Golang with the binary, we might need administrative privileges, but we can always just download an archive and drop it on our system and not even really need to install something. So there's both managing the installation of software itself and the footprint of software that might not be installed but might exist on a system, I think are kind of two important distinctions there.
Yeah.
One other thought on this too, we saw another one within the past week or two related to Trivy, a source code analysis tool where a very similar thing happened, right? Where it's this tool that maybe continuous integration and deployment pipelines rely on from a GitHub Actions standpoint, or perhaps a binary that security researchers are doing to perform, secure code analysis or look at the configuration of an environment. And, with that, it gathered SSH keys, environment variables, cloud provider credentials. When you ran that tool, I believe it was 0.69.4, 5, and 6 for the minor versions there that were vulnerable. So, if you happen to use that tool that wasn't in an isolated environment during that time, which again, it's a common tool. If you happen to ask the generative AI solutions what they would recommend, that's one of the ones that they recommend,
Yeah.
right? So both from a GitHub Actions perspective that was taken advantage of there, and knowing the popularity of the repository itself just seemed to make it a really attractive target. So we've even seen that lead to things like the compromise of light LLM. So, the credentials that were gathered from Trivy were then reused to perform another supply chain compromise. So I think this is just a trend that we're going to continue to see more and more of, as it is an easy way to get really good access, typically to users that have a high level of access too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Derek made a good point at the beginning that this is not a new attack. It's just developing faster and faster now with the help of LLMs. But yeah, we saw this a couple years ago with Polyfill, where it was used by a majority of the internet in an abandoned repo, and then someone picked it up and started attacking it. Right?
Yeah.
When you're using these tools and pulling them into your environment, you need to have a secure process for that. And if you're just doing at latest at the end of at the end of your tag, that's not the best process. You should be forking them or doing some kind of internal duplication to make sure you're keeping track of the changes you're implementing.
Yeah. Well, up next, I want to talk about this Hacker News article, and this really ties into some stuff we've talked about before. Ghost Campaign uses 7 NPM packages to steal crypto wallets and credentials. Researchers found malicious NPM packages posing as developer tools that prompt users for sudo access, then install malware that steals credentials, wallets, and cloud configs. Some of these packages and repos were designed to look legitimate long enough to build trust before turning malicious. And just last week, we were talking about this idea of a compromised workbench, where attackers don't need to break in; they're just allowed access already because there's something that developers trust. This is 7 packages sitting in a trusted ecosystem, no exploit, nothing like that. So, what does a trusted package even mean at this point?
Yeah, especially in the context of NPM, right? It's been subject to quite a few supply chain attacks over the past year, and whatever trust might be left in that ecosystem, it still seems to be taken advantage of in ways like this by again offering a tool that seems like it would be useful. And I think the answer here, at least partially, and it's not going to be an easy one, but to limit the exposure to this sort of supply chain type of problem, I think it's really to do the painstaking process of analyzing the dependencies that are used in your application, determining exactly what's needed, and either one, like Richard mentioned, pinning or vendoring that specific version that is good. Or minimizing the unneeded dependencies by simply rewriting them. Maybe there's just one function within an NPM library that gets used within your application, and you don't even really need that dependency. You just need that one function. So, having a really good understanding of the programming language itself, what the application needs, and then limiting the dependencies that your application relies on, I think is one of the answers here. Not really elegant. It would likely take a lot of organizational effort, depending on how complex the application is and such. But outside of vendoring dependencies, that would have worked here, right? Where it wasn't malicious originally, and then it became malicious. However, if you're not monitoring that process of when things should be upgraded, there's kind of that trade-off between am I leaving vulnerabilities in my application, or should I be updated to the latest version? So perhaps having some time of delay around getting things updated, if it's not a security relevant update, would be an organizational posture to take there.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the painstaking process here. How realistic is this for a lot of organizations to be able to implement? Like, is this kind of something they have to triage and do their best and knock on wood?
Yeah, I would say the bigger the application, the less likely it is to succeed, unfortunately. Ripping out dependencies and replacing them with your own code that's in-house could go incredibly wrong. I'm definitely not suggesting to do this with cryptography libraries as an example, because one might put themselves in a worse position. But doing it with, maybe a string concatenation function that uses an NPM package just for that. It's like, do we really need a package for that? Or can we just make our own function for that and eliminate that dependency? That really is a part of the attack surface today, which we would typically report that as like maybe a vulnerable software or a dependency that, in the context of an application pen test, which is usually a low, maybe a medium if it looks like it's exploitable, but we can't exploit it during the time that we have or such. But this just goes to show that not managing dependencies in the way that can lend itself to security is more likely to lead to a breach today than it was yesterday.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think especially when you look at trying to understand what the code's doing nowadays, it was easier in the old days when you had a lighter lift, like he mentioned, the cryptography library, right? They're so complex now that if you don't understand them, you don't know what they're doing. You just have to blindly trust them. But in the same token, if you're using an old library, so something I do sometimes when I pull in a library from GitHub or whatever, I watch that repo. I watch the pull requests, right? I want to see what changes are coming out of the pipeline that I can probably prevent or if I'm not paying too close attention, at least I have a record of when that pull request came through on my emails. But yeah, like
Yeah.
Derek's saying, it's very tough now, especially as you scale these larger and larger projects and you have more dead code. And it's just so much to go back and try and review on a constant basis.
Yeah. Well, I also want to talk about this story from SC Media, fake interactive Zoom call. This is just fake interactive Zoom call leads to malicious Screen Connect download. Attackers built a fake interactive Zoom call that convinces users to install a Zoom update, which actually just deploys remote access software. There's no exploit. Again, this is just a very convincing environment, getting the user to attack themselves. Basically, why are these still here? Why are these attacks still so effective?
Because they work.
Yep, 100%.
How do we
Especially,
stop them?
yeah, especially as we get more and more remote, and you have people who are less and less likely to have the meeting, or more and more likely to have the meeting spam, where you have tons of meetings. My calendar is booked solid, right? So if I have a client email, I'm expecting an email from a client, and they send me a Zoom link, why wouldn't I click on that, right? Now, being security mindset, it's a little harder to pop an attacker, but when you're looking at the people who have day-to-day jobs that aren't thinking about being ransomware or being attacked, it is going to be harder and harder for them to see the difference between a legitimate link from someone they're expecting and someone they're not.
Yeah, and when I was looking through this one, the novel thing to me was actually using the JavaScript to simulate a real Zoom call.
Yeah.
Clever and something I hadn't seen before there. And for the listeners, it can be incredibly important to make the user believe that they didn't just engage with a phishing campaign. So doing the approach where Zoom is displayed in a browser and it just looks like it's glitching out, as a user, I would think, oh, I did the update and something just went wrong, and maybe I disconnect and I go on to my next meeting because I have so many things going on. So it's crucial when or as it relates to increasing the time to detection, so that the attacker can achieve their goals there. So I thought that was cool, again, just to give the user that level of confidence that they didn't do anything wrong, right? That's a large part of maintaining that foothold that one might work hard to get through that phishing attempt.
And that's a part of this being this type of attack being a real-time attack. You don't have time, like you said, your calendar is loaded. You don't have time to think through this logically like you normally would with doing an update. So you just click it and it's too late.
Yeah,
it's too late. You think you're in a crunch.
No, I was going to say, especially now, it's when we don't use Zoom a whole lot, then you get a Zoom email. It's going to have an update, right? When you use a tool all the time, like whatever tool you use for your meetings, that's going to be hard and hard to catch you. But if you get this email from Zoom and your team doesn't use Zoom every day, it's going to have an update. And you're going to click update and believe that is your problem because you haven't updated Zoom in X amount of months.
Totally.
Yeah, and I'll take a moment to just harp on how it might be easy to blame a user for this. But I'm of the opinion that as technology and security professionals, it's actually our fault for allowing that to happen to the user. If it does happen to a user, should we take their mouse away so that they, can think more as they're hitting the tab key to get to the buttons that are going to enable the phish to be successful? No, but, controls like if a user gets phished, do they need to receive emails from the internet? Does their job role only require receiving emails from internal users?
Sure.
Software restriction policies. We were just talking about that. A Zoom binary is typically going to be signed by that vendor. So when this malicious request comes across, there's likely some sort of warning by the operating system that says, hey, this binary isn't signed, and the user might just click through it. But again,
Yeah.
if we allow the users to do that,
Mhm.
I think it's a failure on us as the security professionals and technology professionals to, like, why are we allowing our users to fail like that to begin with? Why can't we have a policy in place that says, unless this is digitally signed by an organization that we've approved, don't allow the software to be installed? So it is easy to blame a user and walk away, but I think it's much harder to, take responsibility for it and look at the technical system to understand why that user was able to be phished. Like, what were the failures within the technology that allowed that user to be phished? So, yeah, I think
There's
people,
only so much shaming you can do, and that's not going
Yeah.
to fix it.
yeah, there's not a whole lot of
Yeah.
utility in shaming, and I think does just kind of ignore the uncomfortable reality that anyone can be phished. I have a very thorough understanding of how it works, but I can be phished if it
Mhm.
comes at the right moment. Maybe I'm about to, I don't know, pick my kid up at daycare. It's at the end of the day. It comes across as an urgent request, something that I was maybe even expecting because they've, took time to build up that expectation, and then get phished. That's why I
No.
personally don't even read my email. I'm not even sure how I made this meeting.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
That
Explain.
explains so much.
Yeah, no,
uh,
that is a great point. It's something that I I've been out of the physical game for a long time. So it's tough to get back in that mindset. Like, it's not the user's fault, right? It's easy to blame the user when, hey, why'd you click this? I wouldn't have clicked it. Well, yeah, but it wasn't meant for me, right? If it's a
Right.
spearfish to me, like you're describing, maybe it did have, you know, something tailored to me that I've been expecting from either I posted on LinkedIn or on my social media sites and said, hey, looking for this product. And someone emailed me and said, hey, here's this product. I'm like, oh, thanks for the link. Boop. And I click on it. And now I'm infected, right? So I definitely think, yeah, um, more controls from the IT side would prevent a lot of these things from happening. But I know something that I was on a social engineering back in the day, and I was able to compromise one of their email servers and spam out from the relay. And it even tagged that because the email was not a verified email I used. It tagged that as external sender, even though the email
Mm.
matched everything, right? And that set up red flags for people. Even though it's internal email, it said external user. And so I think those little tags and those little helps do help users see that this is not from someone trusted. It's an external email. I know our email, when we click on it, says, this external link. Are you sure you want to click it? You're like, oh, you know what? No, I'm not. So those
yeah,
little
that
catches, you're right about.
that can be an indicator of trust, but I will say, compromising internal email systems, that's
Oh,
naturally going to give users more rapport. If we as an attacker happen to send an email on an internal network and then it doesn't have that particular banner, they're going to likely trust that quite a bit more.
that's true.
But like you pointed out, it sounded to me like would be a misconfiguration of the mail server that is failing to protect the users, right? So, kind of back to security professionals and technology professionals just taking responsibility for the tech there. We really should be trying to shepherd our users to safety from the digital wolves, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Also up this week from Security Week, we have a Cisco firewall vulnerability exploited as 0-day in interlock ransomware attacks. This management flaw was exploited as a 0-day to gain unauthenticated remote code execution, leading to ransomware activity. In this case, exposed management infrastructure was the entry point. Exploitation like this starts immediately. How do we look at the timeline for patching? Like, what does patching quickly look like?
Yeah, we look at most enterprises, most of the larger firms, they do a 30-day rollout, right? For critical vulnerabilities, it's faster. It's 15 days, whatever it is. But really, 30 days is that lock-in. Like, we have to get everything tested and modified and make sure it works. I think that window is quickly dwindling. As a prime example, we actually released a blog post for Strong Swan
Yeah.
yesterday, and that came out Monday. John Williams on our team was able to grab that, use AI to build and detect what was going on, and we had a check within a few hours of that dropping, right? I mean, the time from responsible disclosure to attacking vectors are very the window's closing. So I think now that 15-day window needs to be hours, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't wish anyone to be a target of a nation state, whether it's an organization or a person. This just absolutely raises the bar required for operational security, and it is this sort of asymmetric situation where have a really large organization and we have nation states that are taking these targeted picks at these types of edge software that centralize access, and not only centralize access but grant access to internal more sensitive networks. So yeah, extremely hard to defend against. And a lot of the major business drivers, I think, for software, it's really more designed to support shipping features than it is shipping secure software, which I think as a software industry, that's definitely an area that there needs to be some maturity in, just around the how the frameworks to actually program are written to prevent these sort of unauthenticated remote code execution to root. In 2026 is pretty incredible. But I really think it does just underscore, software as an industry and how it does need to mature to prevent these sorts of mistakes from being able to happen by developers. And I'm also reminded of a conference that a guy gave, or rather a presentation at a conference, went through the presentation, and then he disclosed that he gave this same presentation 20 years ago, but all of it was still relevant.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do feel like as an industry, a lot of the things that we're talking about today have been relevant for some time, and we just still struggle to address them.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you have some of the larger tech firms, you're going to be target, like you said, of a nation state attack. And your defenders work on 8-hour days, and nation states work 24/7. So you're always going to be
Yeah.
up against the gun to try and get your stuff fixed before it's weaponized.
And like I said, it's absolutely asymmetric, that they're going to have more resources to try to attack the systems that you have. And it's not only systems that you have, but it's systems that are somewhat leased or rented or licensed from a third party, right? So you may not even have visibility into the source code. You're just kind of trusting that vendor from a risk management perspective to, do the right things. And we see that that's just extremely difficult when we have nation states that are conducting extremely targeted attacks.
Yeah. And finally, from Cybersecurity Dive, threat groups target cyber physical systems to disrupt critical infrastructure providers. A Clarity report shows attackers are increasingly accessing industrial control systems by abusing exposed interfaces and default credentials without needing exploits sometimes. In some cases, that's already led to real world operational disruption. So, what are the biggest blind spots between IT and OT security?
Yeah, I guess I would start with there being a lot less practical expertise on the OT side of things. The testing approaches that are typically involved with testing OT networks as it's put against IT networks, we could say generally that IT testing is much more active, where let's say we are doing port scans, we are, actively engaging with systems on the network. Whereas OT networks need much more caution, and usually the best approach is to just simply test those passively. So we are
Yeah.
simply gathering network traffic from perhaps a span port off of a core switch or core router that lets us know what traffic is taking place between those different SCADA systems that might control physical systems. So, as it relates to why vulnerabilities might be more present, my understanding is that a lot of the guidance around SCADA solutions from a deployment perspective essentially says, put this stuff on a private, secure network and don't expose it to the internet, because they know it's not intended for that. Maybe there's no authentication. Maybe
Yeah.
there's default passwords and such that are unable to be changed because they're hard coded. There's a whole host of reasons why this stuff shouldn't go on the internet, but largely it's because it's not designed to be. And then with regards to actually testing it and determining whether or not it is in a sensitive network or not, that can definitely be its own struggle, where there's this kind of organizational resistance to performing active testing against OT networks because there could be that adverse physical impact.
Yeah. Yeah, you have the nail on the head. I think expectations versus reality are a big one where like it sounds easy to put these things in this closed closet and not worry about them ever again. But in reality, they need to be accessed and they need to be accessed often. So I would rather them be on my network so I can SSH into them or remote into them in some form or fashion. Easier than walking down 2 blocks or wherever this um, item may be, or I want to hit the API to query how much oil is left in these reservoirs, right? Like those are things we need to do to be able to monitor. And unfortunately, they have to be on the same secluded network, but I need to access other things while I'm also looking at them. So it's definitely one of those tough where the idea sounds great in practice, but the reality is I need them to be interconnected and talk to each other.
Yeah, that sort of organic application of, oh, let's put it on an isolated network, and then maybe an incident happens where it's like, oh, we could have responded quicker if it was able to be accessed. So then they give a little bit of access to it, and then maybe the organization went remote, so they expose things in a certain way on the internet that hadn't been exposed before, without putting it behind a secure access solution and the like. But another point in this article was just around again, we were touching on some nation states that are doing these targets. So I think there is that, this is kind of modern day cyber warfare where this is a fairly, again, asymmetric way to put a negative economic impact on a country or to extract money from an organization if one controls the systems that are physically doing things in the real world. It's a way to kind of cause that negative economic impact that has to be dealt with and isn't being used to produce goods or other services that the organization is intended. And I do think that this is somewhat of a long game of nation states, is just to exhaust resources in this manner.
Yeah. And finally, I'm curious how accurate organizations' beliefs about how exposed they are is versus how exposed they really are. Like, do we think that most organizations have an accurate view of what their kind of weak points are?
I don't think so. In my
Yeah.
experience, organizations, it's a very segmented world, right? So you have one world that is the web app that does little web apps. You have one world that does networking, one world that does the security, and they rarely ever talk to each other. So they aren't really sure what all is exposed out there. So then when we come in and we do a scan, say, hey, these 15 things are hanging out there. The network team's like, we didn't put them there. And the web team's like, well, we needed those to test. And then the network team's like, oh, yeah, I didn't mean to enable those publicly, right? So it's that thing of, I don't even think the teams internally communicate enough to know what's exposed out there. So how can the company as a whole know what's out there?
Yeah. So they need to meet more, but inspect the links on those meetings
Yeah.
very closely.
Yeah. More Zoom meetings. No, it, it's one of those it's one of those caveats where you need a process in place before something is publicly exposed. But at the same time, you have teams that need to test things publicly before they go to market with it. So they expose them, they test them, and they should be tearing them down, but they're not. So you have these lingering systems out there that are just hanging out there. They thought are taken care of. Network team doesn't know about them. We find them in their access point in, right? And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
don't worry. We closed that point down. Now we're safe. And it's like, no, that was just one of the places that we happen to find happenstancely or by happenstance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this one, I would say that clients are generally surprised. They hire us for security work, and then I feel like a large part of what we do as consultants and operators is trusting but verifying, where if they say, this is what we believe, we go out there and we try to verify that. And most often we find that there are things that they didn't know about, or maybe connections that didn't get made because, like Richard said, people weren't communicating. For some of the more sophisticated adversarial work that we do, we'll just simply interview the clients and ask them about their security tooling internally, their architecture, and then put that into practice in the context of an active security assessment, which allows us to get a more informed look at what they have going on and typically produce more security relevant recommendations for what they may have going on. I think organizations think they have a good idea, but when the rubber meets the road, there's typically deficiencies that are spotted just because we have a very specific paradigm that we follow, which is one of security. Whereas the developer teams are concerned with developing and shipping features, the network teams are concerned with, restricting the network. But like Richard said, getting all these teams to talk together will absolutely strengthen the security posture. Because I feel like a lot of my wins just come from talking to the client. There's these calls that 10 people may be in from 5 different departments departments that have never been on a call and have never met
Yeah.
before. And, the first time that this happens is when they're on a call with Bishop Fox. Yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer, but
Look at us bringing people
Perfect.
together.
yeah, I feel like they're generally surprised in the work that I've seen. Yeah.
Well, I think if there's a thread across all of this, it's that, again, it's not just breaking in, it's just how quickly things unfold. And the speed, the trust, user behavior, those are the things that really are working for attackers right now. Derek,
Yeah.
Richard, thank you both for joining so much. I appreciate your insight here. If this is useful, share it with someone inside your organization that you think this could help. We will be back next week. Until then, stay safe.